Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you're here a few minutes early, or if you're watching a pre-recorded version of this, my name is Gavin Simoni, and myself, along with 3 other panel members, are going to be taking you through some questions to help you get licensed in 2023, or at least move you a little bit forward towards that goal. So I'm just going to set up a 5-minute countdown so that we can start on time at 9 o'clock, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Now, if anyone does have any questions, you can just add it in the Facebook or the YouTube comment section, and we should be able to see that here, so we can add those questions to the presentation. And if you're watching a pre-recorded version of this presentation, then obviously you wouldn't be typing in your question, but you can reach us anytime at this email. Hi, everybody. Thank you, and appreciate you joining us. If you're joining us live or if you're watching a pre-recorded version, we really appreciate your interest in this topic, which we're going to be talking about tonight. My name is Gavin Simoni, and I'm a professional engineer licensed in Alberta, and I've been helping people with the licensing process for 11 years now. So I wanted to take you quickly through we have about 2 slides here, and then we're going to get right into your questions. So let's go ahead and do that. So the agenda tonight, and really the purpose of what we're all here for, is to help you make a little bit of progress in your licensing journey in Canada. So I think people on the call here are chasing their P.Eng designation, which is a great goal. And there's a lot of different steps. So by answering your questions, which have been sent in ahead of time, or some people are going to be asking questions live, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can in the 1 hour that we have. We're going to hopefully demystify some of the process and show you that maybe it's a little bit easier than you thought, and encourage you to keep going with it. A lot of people might be stuck on a particular roadblock in one of the different steps, whether that's the academic submission, the law and ethics exam, the experience submission, technical exams, the interview, or something else. So there might be something holding you back or making you nervous for proceeding. So we have a panel of recent P.Eng people who got their designation in the last 6 months or so, and they're going to be answering questions to help you with that. So the brief history just about practice PPE exams is that we've helped over 12,000 aspiring engineers with the different licensing steps in Canada. So we've seen a lot of people go through the process and get licensed. Personally, I receive about 1 to 2 emails a week of people who just received their P.Eng. So it's great to see people who have put in all that work over the past 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, finally reach that goal. And we have 3 great panelists who I'm going to introduce now, and we're going to they're going to help me to answer these questions for you to move you a bit forward in your licensing process. So first we have Mehdi Saudari, and he's a mechanical engineer licensed in BC with EGBC, and he was licensed in September 2022. Hi, Mehdi. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm great. Well, how about you?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so
The
much.
next is Rashid Minaz, and Rashid is a structural designer in Ontario, and he was licensed in October 2022 with PEO. Hi, Rashid. How are you?
Hey, Gavin. How's it going? I'm good.
Great.
Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, we have Eugene. And Eugene is an industrial manufacturing engineer from BC, licensed in January 2023 with EGBC. Hi, Eugene. How are you?
Hello. I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm ready to answer any questions that might help our visitors.
Perfect. Thanks. So I'm just going to switch to, let's try this view here. Okay. And I'm going to post up the first question, and the first question will might block some of our faces on the video, but I can move the screens around a bit and we'll see how it works. So question 1 comes from Ruben, and he asks, how long from start to finish did it take you to get licensed, and how much time was waiting for your association to review documents and exams? So if you say a period of, let's just say 3 years, what percentage of that was waiting versus going through the process on your own? Who would like to start that one?
So I would like to take a shot at it. So for me, I applied. I submitted my application March of 2022, and I submitted all the experience records and reference forms and all of that. And I think about a week or 2 later, I got the confirmation that it's within the review stage. And from then it took me all the way to September to get the notification that it's been accepted, and I will be getting my P.Eng that I'll be hearing shortly about my confirmation about my status. So from March, so it took us basically about the 6 months that they said. During that time, it was taking longer, but fortunately, it was within the 6 to 7 month time frame from start to finish, from submitting my application to getting that, to having to submit my fees to get my P.Eng.
And Rashid, you were educated here in Canada?
Yes. So for me, I didn't have to write any exams except the NPPE, the National Professional Practice Examination, the law and ethics part.
Right.
But none of the technical exams. I did my undergrad here. So.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. Yeah, it's going to be obviously shorter. There's fewer steps for Canadian engineering grads than there are for internationally educated grads. So we'll get into a slide on that later. Eugene, how about yourself?
Interesting. I'm at the opposite spectrum from Rashid, I guess. For me, it took about 2 years to get my license. Part of it was because of me. It took quite some time to get all my validators, go over the competencies and submit them, and also to pick the appropriate time to take the exam, the law exam for myself, given the amount of work we had going on. However, it's about 40% of that time was spent waiting for AGBC, unfortunately, to get back to me to even look at the competencies.
Okay. Yeah. So we have a range so far of 6 months to 2 years. And Mehdi, and how about yourself?
Actually, from mine also would be different because, when I landed, it was 2014. And because, I had some experiences in my home country, so I was able to apply for P.Eng through the AGBC. So, I did documentations, all the documentations, and, gather all the documents and verified them. But when I passed 1 year working, again, I submitted some other documents, including, experiences, detailed experiences, and also the references, signed papers, signed for me, referred me. So that time also took, I took, interview from EGBC because EGBC's process has a interview, technical interview. But after that, it was something, that I should have, finished at that time. But I left it because in the industry that I joined was a marine industry, and the regulations was totally different with the, what we have in Canada because they were following the international regulations and rules. So I didn't, time for that. But finally, last year, just only law and ethics exam remained, and just pass that one and wrap up everything. I don't
Sorry, from start to finish, how long would you say it took you from
if
start
I
to
want
finish?
to consolidate all of them, maybe it's going to be 1.5 years. But if I want to say a real one, 8 years.
Right, because you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it depends. I guess there's a association factor because they're sometimes currently maybe limited by staff and people who can volunteer and pandemic constraints. And then there's an applicant factor. How quickly can you go through the exams and how quickly can you submit your experience record, and are there any life events that disrupt that kind of process? So yeah, it's important to proceed as quickly and as safely as you can because the association does need time to properly review and go through the documents. Let's go to question number 2, which comes from Ali, and he was just wondering, does anyone has anyone done a master's degree from a Canadian university? And if they did have technical exams because they were overseas, did the masters help them waive any exams. So did Mehdi, did you, or Eugene, did you guys write any technical exams?
Not me.
There isn't, technical exams. For EGBC, it depends on the interview. After interview, if they recognize that they need that individual person needs to have, study and has a technical exam, yeah. But for mine, the interview, I passed the interview. But here, I don't have the master degree, but as far as I know, I'm not pretty sure about that. In EGBC, if someone has a master's degree, a technical exam, may waive.
Yeah. So we've come across this with past clients, and so typically technical exams are assigned if there's a gap between your international experience and your Canadian equivalent. Now, typically a master's degree, it might be a thesis based, so you want to be taking courses that could fill that gap. And sometimes you take a master's in a different topic than what you did in your undergrad. So normally doing a master's degree likely won't waive any technical exams, but it's something you can talk with your association, Ali, if you're going down that route.
I also believe, sorry to interject. Mm-hmm. I also believe there is a more important detail to consider here than a master's degree. I have a degree in mechanical engineering from Romania, and I applied to join EGBC based on my Canadian experience and degree from overseas. Now, having a degree from overseas goes hand in hand with the international accords between countries. There is the Gavin, the accord, Canada, United States, New Zealand.
Yeah, the Washington Accord, yeah.
Yeah, they are part of one of them. There are about 9 or 12 countries, I believe. But also from Europe, there is the Bologna Accord, that started in 2012. And it has over 30 European countries recognizing each other's degrees. And I believe that helps. It's more important than getting a master here. Now, regarding the master, I'm also a coordinator for the co-op students we hire on a regular basis at my company. And I see a number of them having degrees from overseas and a master from a Canadian university, and they are already registered as engineers in training. So it helps.
Okay. Good feedback. Thank you. Number 3, Abdelkram asked, tips to pass the NPPE, any suggestions or resources for preparing? So just quickly, I think everyone had to do the NPPE because it's a mandatory step. What would you say would be your big takeaway or advice for this question?
If I can start, if it's okay with everybody. For me, in BC, and Mehdi knows as well, we had to finish a 9-hour seminar in preparation for the exam, but that was not enough. I felt that I didn't cover everything properly. And then I did some research based on the recommendations from EGBC, and I picked Gavin's course. And for me, the most helpful part of this course was about ethics and contractual law. I have some experience with contracts, but not to the extent is required for the exam.
Rashid or Mehdi?
Yeah, so continuing on BC. So yeah, as said, so we have, webinar here. So at first, that, the webinars, by the time you developed, and I think the second version was quite better than, the first version. It's categorized everything, and based on that, explain the situation. So that one is a good, I think before starting, in my experience, going through that webinar is going to be help to have a big picture of that what's going on this law and ethic, and typical and some this questions is so easy, but at least give some idea about that. So everyone's studying is methodology may be different, but for me, I'm kind of the person that when I'm reading something, for especially for the exam, I'd like to know that how, for example, the exam question pick evaluate my knowledge. So really getting your question, the questions that you gathered, it was really awesome. So especially this series that I don't know when you started to this for this 500 questions. To me, that when I was reading the chapters, or even if I go through the the notes and reading the notes, I turn back over to the questions and review the questions to see that what was wrong for me inside. So, and based on each references that textbook has, that the answer had, that for example page something, and from the law ethic books. So I went through again to textbook to see specifically when you read that part. Seems that when you have a second eyes or something, you feel you catch something that you never missed at first. Like when you're watching a movie, if you're watching for a couple of times, triple times, at the end, the second try or third try, you see that you miss some of the scenes. So it was something like this to me. And specifically at the end, I practiced a lot for the questions mostly. The questions, was very helpful to me to, understand better the textbook. The textbook is 700 pages. And, it was, for me, quite difficult to, keep all of the things, in my mind. But the questions, really helped me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rashid, did you have anything to add, or did that?
Yeah, for me,
Were they-
for PEO here, like when I did the NPPE, I think in my undergrad there was a course for law and ethics. In our final year, I think that helps you. But then there were two books. I'll get you the names later, Gavin. But those two books, I think 250 pages each or so.
Yep.
Those are what I really read. Like I didn't skim through. I read and tried to understand each chapter. And the questions that I practiced were from the APEG-A website, I think, where they have 100 practice questions. And I purchased those and I practiced those. But the real exam was a bit different from those practice questions. But it was really the books. I think once you understand the fundamentals of the law and ethics, the questions, no matter what it is, you can apply the principles or the theories that you've learned. And so yeah, those two books were, to me at least, very helpful.
Okay. I think you're probably talking about the Sanders Law book and the Andrews Ethics book. Those are the two ones that
Sanders Law, yes. The
that
ethics
line up
one,
the best.
but yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. A couple more other questions have come in from YouTube just about the 110 questions, even though there's only 100 that are scoring. So there's 10 extra questions that are added. What are those about? So the associations add 10 extra questions because they're testing them out to see if they're going to be hard enough for future sittings. So they're kind of scrambled into the exam. So you don't know which ones are future testing questions and which ones are actual counting questions. So they're all based on the same syllabus, so you won't be able to tell one from the other. So the best advice is just do them all and treat them all as if they were counting. And then Amitab asked, do I need to score above 65% in all topics or 65% overall? So it's a 65%, it's a weighted average. And you can use a calculator on our website. If you search NPPE results calculator on our website or in Google, you'll find it. And you can play with the slider. So essentially topics 2, 3, and 4 are worth 70% of your mark. So if you don't do well in those topics, it'll be tricky to pass the exam. So hope that answers those questions. Let's get back to the the
And
other question.
actually, sorry interrupting you. You did a really, great job to this. Questions. That first the law and ethics had really few source of question and answers. But I really thank you, for all your effort that your team did it on this matter.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I
Question
just
number
want to. Yeah, sorry, I interrupt again. I just
That's
want
okay.
to. No, I just want to add to what Mehdi just said. The questions and answers, and that's a very important detail. You also provide the answers with explanations. If you pick the wrong one in your preparation, then you get a feedback right away. That is invaluable. I also have a PMP from Project Management Institute, and over there, passing that exam for the PMP, I had a similar experience. If you can see what your mistakes are, how you need to adjust your mind frame for it, that is fantastic. And at the beginning, when I did your questions, I didn't do very well. I was in the low 60s, and then I improved quite a bit. I actually improved about 20% before the exam.
Got it. Yeah, I did my PMP a while back, and I used Velociteach, and I think maybe that's where I got that strategy of providing really detailed explanations to the answers, because if you want to know why
exactly
the answer is the right answer, and providing the detail is important. Question number 4, Yervant asked, did anyone have challenges getting licensed due to a lack of Canadian experience? And did you have trouble finding work without having any Canadian experience here in Canada? So this might not apply to Rashid as much, but Eugene or Mehdi, if when you came to Canada, was there any challenges with the license aspect or with the job hunting aspect?
Job hunting aspect for sure, yes. You have no Canadian experience and nobody knows you. You have to prove yourself first. But in order to prove yourself, you need to be given an opportunity. So it's kind of a catch-22. After you break that circle and you prove yourself, then it's different.
So in terms of lack of experience, yeah, it's a circle that, everyone, the company that when you're going, for the hiring process, they're saying that we need a Canadian experience. And then, and also, or P.Eng. When you go through the P.Eng says that you need experience. And, it's close cycles that everyone passing each other. But to me, based on my experience, when I started, so the documentations. So EGBC, got all of my documents and evaluate them. So in terms of that, I didn't have any problem for that. But in terms of, finding the job, so as long as, they interviewed me and they needed some technical background to see that if I fit, to that position, so so they were okay. But if I was, for example, that time in a company that like this, the current company that needs me to sign it and seal it, so might different. They might, hired me and ask me to, when you're eligible, you go through pass the exam and have your P.Eng license. That's, the only things, that I can, have for this question.
Sure. No, that's good feedback. We see, or I hear, just because I read newsletters from PEO and Engineers Canada and the other associations, that they're trying to streamline the process and make the Canadian experience less important, or maybe even remove it. I haven't seen any associations that have said you don't need any of it, but I think that could be a trend that some of them are moving towards to kind of streamline the process. So if you have experience in a similar country, let's just say United States, then that in the future, this might be an avenue where it's accepted right away as Canadian experience. So we're seeing a little more flexibility in terms of that way, but it's not something that's happening across Canada where the Canadian component is waived at this point, but who knows what the future will hold. Question number 5, Mark asks, did anyone have an interview with PEO? What advice would you give? So Mehdi, I guess the closest interview would have been yours with EGBC. Maybe do you want to provide advice on that side, and maybe Mark can apply it in a Ontario context.
So for the EGBC, so as long as you know they need some to write this sort of after when I handled that, submitted that report. Just after that, I had technical interview that regarding what I wrote in the report. They were asking me questions about those.
Okay, it was breaking up a little bit. The first part of your answer there. Did anyone else have? Okay, would you mind repeating that whole thing, because of the first half was a bit fuzzy. Sorry about that.
No problem. So, EGBC, as I mentioned, has an interview. Everyone that based on the interview, they recognize to either that person needs to have a technical exam, passing technical exam or not. So for my, when I submitted the report, the only things that was, so important to me, and I'm recommending that to do this. So trying to write everything that is specifically you are specific on that, and you're expert on that, to maneuver on those questions, potential questions that you were asking. So in the interview, so they called me. So based on what I reported, so they were asking me some technical question, from my reports, and I truly knew I could answer them. And also, there's a whiteboard, and if I needed, I could stand and elaborate for that.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we've our company used to help with the ERC interview preparation in Ontario, so I can kind of speak to what we used to do, or what applicants used to do. They used to, in Ontario, it was more project based, so you'd present 2 projects. So you present one for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then the panel would ask you technical questions about that for 15, 20 minutes, and then you present your other one, and then they would test your deep knowledge on the specifics of that project. So I guess just coming up with 2 really solid projects that are technical in PEO's eyes, and something that front and back, left and right, up and down, that's the best way. But also practicing with someone else. So if you can find a supervisor or an expert in that area, present that, ask them to grill you, maybe buy them lunch, and have a little lunch session where you present and they ask you questions, and you go back and forth, and then get their feedback to find out if your answers made sense, and if they were, if they could be improved. So that's what I recommend to Mark to do to help him with the interview. Question number 6. Let's move on to see what Stephen asks. He's wondering, what happens if your references, one of your references, die, retire, or become irritated because you've moved away from their company or whatever? Can a manager deny a work reference? So did anyone have the experience where one of their references were not available, or they retired, or didn't want to provide them the reference during the application process?
Unfortunately, not for me. No. Or fortunately, maybe I should say that. Fortunately, I didn't have that problem.
So me, I didn't have this sort of experience, but in the first job, as I mentioned, so my manager was a technical manager, but by experience, and he didn't have license. So at that time, they agreed, to submit it. But when I wanted, to go to process a year after that, after 1 year experiences, they were asking, to find other persons, for the second PH, approve me. And yeah, I couldn't find no problem. At first, they agreed, but they couldn't do anything else as long as there were no other PNs in the office.
Sounds good. Rashid, how about yourself?
I didn't, like I should say, fortunately as well, I didn't have anyone reject. But then I had this one situation. There was one of my references. She took a while. Like I had sent her the, of course, I got confirmation from each of my referees that they were willing to sign, etc. But then she took like 3, 4. It was going on to 3 weeks or so, and then I start because all of my other references submitted their forms within a week, and she was taking a while and she was not confirming. So in fact, I reached out to PEO and I asked if I could change one of my referees, like the same job, same role, but someone else in who oversaw my work as well. And PEO said that yes, you can. That you need to send a request and you can change your referees. But within that time, she reached back to me and she submitted the reference. It was some issue from her side, but that was that. So I didn't have anyone not go through with it, but there was a slight hiccup.
Sounds good. Yeah, I when I was submitting with Apega, the same thing happened to me. One of my 3 references, he just didn't want to find the time. I switched jobs, and maybe he was not happy that I left. So he just kept delaying it, and then I contacted Apega, and they were fine switching it to someone else in that office. And I phoned her up, and she said she'd be happy to do it. She did it that day, and the process kept moving. So yeah, it is possible. Sometimes you're kind of maybe in Steven's case, he might be with a smaller company where there's only one P.Eng in the whole place, or he's very limited and he doesn't have another coworker. So we have had that situation, Stephen, where someone has worked in a company with very little options to find a consultant or supplier who's familiar with their work, or another coworker. So I'm going to try and dig up that information and send it off to you later in the week, so that you can get a good answer, because it's not always as easy as just finding the person who sat beside that person. It might be a little more tricky, so I'll help you more with that. Let's move on to question number 7 from Ali, Nicholas, and Minaju. I wonder, could you explain how the license changes are changing in Ontario in 2023, specifically peak, E.I.T status, and experience reporting? So what PO is doing is making the peak mandatory. So you're going to have to start reporting your professional development hours starting this year. And there's information on their website. I believe it's 30 hours per year. But first you have to do an assessment to determine the exact numbers. The E.I.T status will be removed later in the year. So if you're an E.I.T right now, you can keep renewing your E.I.T as long as you're making progress in your license. But if you're not an E.I.T, you can't become an E.I.T after, I think, either July 1st or May 15th of 2023. They're removing it. And then the last one is the experience record is being changed to the competency-based assessment, which follows the other provinces which maybe 10 or so of them are already following that. So most other provinces aren't changing anything because they're already doing the competency-based assessment. And they seem to be keeping their E.I.T or M.I.T titles for now. We haven't heard anything about the other associations dropping that, but E.I.T with PO, they felt that the E.I.T was so tied into the experience reporting, the experience record, so they would approve it every single year. And they would say, yes, you're on track. Yes, your experience looks good. It's on track. But with a competency-based assessment, they can't do that. So they felt that the E.I.T, doesn't really mean enough. So they're sort of sunsetting it now, but they might bring it back in a different form. They're just not sure what the future holds for the E.I.T status.
So Gavin, just a
Yes.
question. So the E.I.T status, so let's say some firms require the status, let's say consulting firms.
Right.
They'll want you to be an E.I.T like license, so you can say E.I.T, but so what happens there? Like,
well, the E.I.T is not really licensed. It's just kind of a title that it demonstrates to employers that you're working towards the P.Eng essentially, but it doesn't actually allow you to do anything
Yeah.
engineering really related. So PO said that they're going to be working with their stakeholders and with industry to kind of educate them about this. So it's just going to be an education piece, and employees are going to say, well, boss or employer, I can't get it because they don't offer it anymore. And then they'll soon change their policy and realize that E.I.T is not something that they can enforce because it's not available at that time.
It's fair.
Question number 8, Soju asks, if there's no P.Eng in my current company, can I get a limited license or P.Eng to practice? So I can talk about this one, and then you guys can add anything if you want. So a limited license is not really what you would typically do to practice. It's a temporary license if you're licensed elsewhere and you want to work in a province. But what you'd be looking for is to get a P.Eng if you're with your association and you intend to practice, but it's not just a P.Eng that you need. If you're providing services to the public, then you also need a certificate of authorization or a permit to practice, depending on the province. And along with that, then you would need liability insurance. So it's not quite as simple as becoming a P.Eng and opening a company and providing services. You have to go through an additional step of the certificate of authorization or permit to practice. So that's kind of how that works. And a limited license is for someone with usually a technical background, which is very narrow in scope. So if they've done a technical diploma and they've specialized in a very narrow field, then they would apply for a limited license to allow them to work on a very limited scope. But again, they would be working for a firm with a certificate or permit and liability insurance to kind of make sure that their clients have some sort of protection in that way. Did anyone want to? I'm going to start looking over the live comments now, but if anyone wants to add anything there, they can, and I'll go look at these comments.
I can add if it's fine with everybody else. This has been my case for a number of years. I worked for companies where there was maybe one P.Eng or not even that. And I believe without having the support of your employer, of your working colleagues, it's very hard. You need to go through the process, and they have to be involved to support you with the competencies and as you already mentioned. So is it possible? Probably it is, but it's much harder. That's my experience. That's why it took me so long to finally get my license. Finally, my employer has a very deep engineering department and supported me from the beginning. So
great, thank you for that. I'm just going to post up some other ones. So Yasser on Facebook is wondering, in Ontario, if you have a PhD from Canada, will they waive technical exams? And this goes back to our earlier question about the master's degree and could they waive? So typically they're comparing undergraduate degrees, but in the event that you do take a course in your master's or PhD, it could be something that your association might consider waiving that specific topic. But typically what you're doing on a master's or PhD level, it might be more thesis and less course based, maybe not, but so it's unlikely that you would waive exams. But again, you're going to have a conversation with your association and see what they can do for you. Here's a question from YouTube. Durcoat asked, how about the NPPE with PEO? So the NPPE is the same for all participating regions now. PEO used to have a pen and paper exam, Part A, Part B, and then they switched to the NPPE, which had some Ontario-specific questions added to it. Now they dropped that, so everyone, all associations that subscribe to the NPPE write the same exam, and the exams are based on Canadian generic questions, so they're not really testing on the differences between provinces, but more the similarities between what's common between them, as well as law and ethics, which is fairly standard. Arnell is wondering about, can you provide a brief discussion on what questions during the technical written examination interview? So Mehdi, I guess your exam, was there any written component in your interview? Oh, I think Mehdi's frozen. Arnell, we might have to get back to you personally on this one in the next day or two. So just stand by for an answer for that one. Let's see who else we have something from. Okay, Fernando is wondering if the E.I.T certificate is worth the effort before becoming a P.E, and I think he is referring to a P.Eng because P.E would be for the United States. He has 5 years of experience in Canada. So was anyone on the call? Did anyone go through the MIT or E.I.T process and find it of benefit?
I did. I was E.I.T, but then that's because my consulting firm required it. But I don't think it was of much. Like, I did not utilize any of the experience review processes or anything. So to me, it was not of much benefit.
Right.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Eugene and Mehdi, I guess because you're internationally educated, you might not have been eligible for the MIT or EIT. Is that correct?
I'm not so sure how to answer this. Sorry, Mehdi, to cut you off
no
again. We have, as I said, a big engineering department, about 100 people. And some of my colleagues went through the E.I.T designation, and they were internationally trained. And my opinion, I could be wrong, but my opinion is that once you get the E.I.T designation, that means at least your academic qualifications are accepted. And this might answer Andy's question in the chat as well.
Okay.
One of my colleagues, originally from Korea, yeah, he was E.I.T for a while, and then he became P.Eng.
Okay, got it. So yeah, Fernando, I mean, it can be worth it if you're using it to the full extent. So, for example, in Ontario, submitting your experience every year and getting it approved, but the E.I.T is being phased out in Ontario. So if you are going to apply and if you do qualify for it, then you should do that soon because it won't be around for too much longer in Ontario. But other provinces for now are keeping the E.I.T or MIT if they have that program in place. Eugene, you mentioned Andy. So if his question is, if one carries the E.I.T, does that mean they already meet the academic qualifications? So yeah, that's typically, the E.I.T is typically for Canadian grads. There might be some other ways for internationally educated folks to get the E.I.T, but it is, typically means they're through the academic stage and they're gaining experience towards their P.Eng or their 4 years. Let's see. Yasser's wondering, will PO notify you that your references are not responding? So, Rashid, did you get notified when your references weren't responding, or did you just were you just following up with them?
I was just following up. I think I have heard, or when I was researching, I have heard that PEO will sometimes reach out if it takes too long. They'll be like, one of them has not responded yet, but no, they didn't mention anything. I just followed up.
Okay. Yeah, it's the same with me. I just followed up with my references when I did it through Pega a number of years ago. Now I think everything's moving online to the online portal, so it should be easier to see which steps are incomplete and complete. So if PEO has that resolution in their online portal, it might be easier to track that way, and you can pinpoint the specific reference who hasn't submitted and who has already completed it. So hopefully they have that ability, but if not, you'll have to keep in contact with your PEO representative and your referees to make sure that they are responding to the 2-page questionnaire.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We have an excellent portal here in BC, and you can keep track daily on how your application is going.
We have another question here again from YouTube. What is the competency-based experience record reporting? Is it good for Ontario engineers? So it's going to be, on July 1st, the experience record will be sunset, and then this will replace it. So it's what the other provinces use, and I think it's a good thing because it's more specific than the experience record. So it's asking you specifically about instances in your career. So tell us about a time where you had to use codes and standards to resolve a problem. Tell us about a time where you had to apply engineering theory to use a problem. So it's those types of questions that some applicants may find easier than the current system, which kind of leaves it up to you in the 5 categories. And some people find it hard to address those 5 categories and come up with a whole bunch of examples. So we're not sure which way PEO will take it, if they're going to follow the system in Alberta or the system that BC and a number of other provinces use, or if they create their own system, their own competency system, which has a different number than the 22 or 34 that we see in other provinces. We're not sure. We'll probably find that out in closer to June or July, but I think it's a good thing, but we'll see how it plays out over the next few months.
And I just want to add to this that the competencies part of my application was very informative, educative. I learned a lot about myself, actually, looking back, to be able to present what I have done, what my experience was about is a great aspect of the application. I think we should continue having it and to have it expanded to all the provinces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for anyone listening who might be a year or two off from submitting their experience, it's a great idea to keep a journal or some sort of log of specific challenges that you've overcome that were, unique and truly challenging. Because if you wait till the end of your 4th year to try and remember all those details and the specifics of your calculations or the specifics of how you dealt with a contractor or a consultant or owner, it's going to be a lot harder than if you just keep notes each year and kind of log that information. So something to consider if you're not ready to submit your experience in the next few months. Let's see if we can get one more question in here. Gad asked, my application got approved and I passed the NPPE, and now I have 2 years to get my Canadian experience under the supervision of a P.Eng, and no one at work seems to have it. Time is almost over. What can I do? So this is, so if you're not working under P.Eng, what I usually recommend is, switching departments. So maybe there's a sister company, or if your company is large, you might have a just different department where you could have the opportunity to work under a P.Eng and do more design work where you're applying engineering theory and your manager's, taking responsibility and you're getting that exposure. And if that's not possible within your own company, then looking outside of your company is something that, might have to be done if the P.Eng is really something that you need to have. And that's a conversation that that's just something you have to sit down and plan and think about. Some people are okay with just getting their PMP, and that's or a different designation, and that will serve them well in their career, and a PEng really isn't needed. So you have to determine if a PEng is something you must have, or it's something that you want to have, but maybe you can live without for now, or maybe it's something that it's you don't really need in your career. But the answer is different for everyone. Some people need to change jobs and work under a PEng and gain that experience, and that's their life goal, to become a PEng, and very important to them. So in that case, changing companies might be necessary.
So what I can add to this, in BC, you need to have 4 validators to validate your 34 competencies presented to the association, and 2 out of 4 minimum have to be PEngs. So I'm not exactly sure if you really need to be supervised directly by a PEng. Your direct manager is not a PEng, but I've been working with PEngs. So maybe this answer helps.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of gray area for the associations. I mean, what they've asked for is 12 months under the direct supervision, but in a big office, sometimes you could be reporting to 2 different people, or more to the non-PEng than the PEng, and
Exactly.
So it's not for us to determine. It's really for your association to determine if your experience is what is required. Let's see if I missed any ones. I'm just going to try and pull one more because we're reaching the end of this. Adrian asked, were you requested to explain your experience more to provide more clarification after you submitted your experience record? Do they provide you with guidance for what they're looking for? So I have an answer to this, but I'll let everyone respond. So when you guys submitted your competency assessment or your experience record, did it get approved right away, or was there any back and forth between the associations, between the association and you to kind of get it improved a bit?
I did not, for myself, there was no back and forth, but in terms of guidance for what to put in it, like for PEO, at least for the experience records, in the form itself, they give you examples on how to write it out. And in general, I just used the SMART-based approach, like, measurable tasks, action, results, and all of that. And so that was it. So there was no back and forth. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Mehdi or Eugene?
On EGBs, I've not had, this experience to have the back and forth with them. But before going to write, the time that they applied, it was paper-based, and not only filling everything is online. But before that, just talk with some of my friends to take those, their experiences, read some of 2 or 3 reports of, my friends, to figure out that how to write how to write the report. And yeah, that's all. And based, as Rashid said, there is a instruction also in the website of each province.
Yeah, and I just Mehdi is not done. Sorry.
I think it's cutting out a bit.
Yeah, it's cutting out a bit, Mehdi. Can we switch to Eugene and come back to you then? Okay, go ahead, Eugene.
Pardon
and we'll
me?
come back to Mehdi. Well, it was just getting a little bit choppy there. So
Oh, yeah.
is it okay if we switch to Eugene and come back? Okay, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, my experience is the same as Rashid's. There was no back and forth once EGBC looked at my competencies. And when you write your competencies, you have to be very precise. And there is a limit on the number of characters you can put in to fill in the fields about the situation, action, and the outcome. And also feel free and don't be afraid to ask your validators to look at the competencies before you submit them. My validators provided excellent feedback and helped me refine what I submitted.
Great. Yeah, so we do have clients all across on Canada with who've been submitting, and sometimes they submit without any issues and they get everything accepted, whether that's the CBA or the ER. And then sometimes their association pushes back a little bit. So for the competency-based assessment, they might say, okay, here's a list. Here are these 5 or these 7 or these 12 or these whatever number. You weren't specific enough. So here's a list of the competencies, and here are the specific reasons why we can't accept them, or we're unable to review them. And it might be they're not long enough, they're not specific enough, they're about your job duties instead of a specific problem. So usually the association will give you feedback, and that goes the same in Ontario too with the experience record. If there's an issue, if it's too short or too long or not specific enough, if you're just talking about your day-to-day duties and how you chair meetings and it's very high level, then they're going to want to drill down to the specifics. So within each within each section, application of theory, practical experience, and so on, they want specific examples, not your day-to-day duties and work description. So you're not writing a resume, you're writing specific problem statements and the engineering steps that you took to resolve those statements. So you really want to think at a near professional level when you're submitting your experience to whatever province. So you're not, if you're applying, high school math, if you're calculating the volume of soil or something like that, that's not really what something at a professional level is doing, right? So we want to make sure that we're applying university level engineering theory. We're solving complex problems, and that goes for all the different competencies. So you don't want to be talking about, I use the phone and I use the internet and I use email, because everybody does that, right? But if you're demonstrating something like communication, you can talk about how you use conflict resolution techniques to resolve a dispute between an owner and a contractor, something like that. So just think sort of as deeply as you can about each example that you're putting forth, as Eugene mentioned, and then you shouldn't have too many problems. And if there's a bit of back and forth, that's a good opportunity for you to sit down with someone who's been through this. Might be a coworker or manager or someone like that, and they can sort of review your updated submission and help you make sure that it sounds the best that it can. So with that, I think that's a great place to close things off. I want to thank our panelists, Eugene Demian, Mehdi Sadari, and Rashid Menaz. Thank you so much for your time and lending your expertise. I want to sort of preface this as well that the advice or the suggestions that we're giving is based on our experiences only, and the licensing process changes all the time. So before you make a decision about your licensing process, it's a good idea to double check with your association, or you can contact our company as well. I'll just put the email here at the bottom. Right here, you can send us your email, and we'll get back to you within 1 business day. And we'd be happy to help you with your different licensing steps. We currently help with the NPPE, the experience record or competency-based assessment, the technical exams, and continuing professional development for those that are licensed. So thanks again for attending, everyone who's watching this live or a pre-recorded version. And thank you to the panel, and good luck for everyone who's going through the licensing process this year. Take care.
Thank you for
Thank you so
having me.
much.
Good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Take
Thanks,
care,
guys.
everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.